Ray, good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. This is really exciting.
Yeah, a little context for all of you. Ray and I met a few weeks ago at this Atlassian event that was put on for project managers. Do you have any idea how many people were there?
I think they said total RSVPs were about 167 and about 120 showed up.
Wow, yeah. So there were quite a few people there, and it was a really engaged audience. And I had several people come up to me afterwards, like crying, who I was like hugging. So it was a really beautiful evening of really deep interactions. What was funny is we really weren't given a particular prompt. It was anything sort of about project management. And I gave a talk about motivation and leaders being able to build trust and what are the pieces to building trust and being an effective leader today and why that's important. And then you came in and you also were talking about trust, and we did not coordinate that.
Yeah, no, that was a little bit wild. I remember thinking when you were giving your talk that I was like, oh God, I have to go after this guy, one, because your talk was phenomenal. But two, just we should have done something together because you did motivation and trust and I did trust as it impacts creativity. And and I think that's how we ended up here today.
Yeah, no, I think you turned to me and you were like, just wait, I'm going to be the pathos to your logos.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there we were.
There we were. And now we're here.
We are here.
So I wonder if we can kind of zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
And let's start a little bit with, what's your story?
Oh, God. How far back do you want me to go? Professional, personal?
I trust your judgment. Whatever feels right in this moment.
Okay. Yeah. I have always been a little bit of a precocious person. I was a loquacious little girl. My mom always
Loquacious.
said,
That's a good word.
Thank you. My mom always said, you were the quietest baby in the world until you learned to speak, and then you never shut up. I was thinking about it on the way here, like so much of my life. I really wanted to be the demure, cutesy, laid back, like go with the flow girl. There is nothing go with the flow about me. I am so type A. It's nauseating. But that's kind of manifested itself in all areas of my life. I remember being in grade school, and I was the kid who would make petitions when I thought homework assignments were unfair or teachers were being unfair, and I would circulate them at recess. And I remember my mom one time, we were out, and there was a pregnant person experiencing homelessness, and I just went up and gave her a hug, and my mom's like, you shouldn't do that, but that was very sweet.
Yeah.
It's dangerous but sweet. And so I've always just had kind of this overwhelming empathy, but with a little bit of an attitude problem, and that's a very interesting thing to navigate. And it's led to a very interesting career path. I started in the marketing department at a small education company in San Luis Obispo after graduating with my public relations degree from Cal Poly, and then I moved into customer support in military manufacturing.
How did that happen?
I got fired from the marketing job.
Nice.
Probably because of the attitude problem.
Bit?
Yeah. So it was one of those things where I was 22, fresh out of college, with all of these big ideas, and also no one had ever really told me no before in my life. So I didn't necessarily know how to professionally navigate no.
Sure.
Where it's one of those things where I still to this day don't think my ideas were wrong. I think they would have been very beneficial, but I didn't know how to play that corporate game where, okay, the people who have been here for 15 years are shutting this down. How do you navigate that with poise? How do you chess play that a little bit? I still am not necessarily good at it. I don't enjoy the corporate politics, but I did end up kind of stepping on the wrong toes with not only my ambitions and some of the recognition I got from the CEO, but also just with my unprofessionalism and hearing no to some of my ideas. So I did get fired, but it was a very humbling experience. And then COVID happened. So I was able to somehow through COVID, because defense does well in all types of economies. So I ended up doing customer support for a military manufacturing company, also in San Luis Obispo, and I loved that. But there was no upwards mobility, and that's how I ended up in tech. And
were you surprised to love that role with a military manufacturer?
I was, and this is when I started to kind of understand how my brain worked a little bit better, because the whole reason I had majored in public relations was because it was in the journalism school and writing was easy for me. Cal Poly, you have to declare your major when you apply. So it wasn't like let me go to school and figure out what I like.
Sure.
It was just show up at 17 and I'm a journalism PR major now.
Sure. And did you stay that your whole time?
Yes, yeah. I tried to switch into psychology, funny enough, my freshman year, and they were like, nope, you can't do that. And I was like, all right.
All right, I guess I'll
Solid.
stay here.
Yep, I guess I live here now. But I didn't really understand what I liked about work and what my brain liked about work until that military manufacturing job. And the reason it's so funny is we would see these demonstrations of these products that we were helping build, and it was like two sides of me. One side was like, wow, this is so cool, and the engineering on this is phenomenal, and I'm obsessed with how this is designed and how it works, and I want to take it apart. And then the other side of me was very aware it was going to be used to kill lots of people, and so it was a hard thing to wrestle with. But there was nowhere for me to go in the company, which is how I ended up in tech, because I was like, okay, like I know I have this technical side of me now.
Sure.
Let's see where that goes. And got poached from the support role I was hired for to be a product manager. Fell in love with product.
At the same company?
Yes, at the same company.
Cool.
Fell in love with product because it's very analytical. It's very project management type oriented. I get to work with engineers without having to be an engineer.
Can you talk a little bit about that transition? Because I know, here's why I ask. I was on a panel last night for Wilmington University on the future of the workforce. And it's kind of a scary time for folks coming out of college, because there are more people actively looking for a job right now at this moment than at any other point in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And when you really look at the skill sets that companies need, one of the things that's obviously really been shrinking is what we would call, the soft skills or relational skills, or some people will, brand them the power skills, but ultimately the ability to communicate yourself well, regulate your emotions, understand what other people feel and need, and to be able to navigate conflict and communicate effectively.
Right.
And so, like, if you have those skills and you're, disciplined enough to be hardworking, you can be really valuable in lots of different roles. But a lot of folks kind of struggle with, like, well, maybe I went to school for journalism or PR or psychology or marketing, but I really am kind of interested in, product or tech or engineering. And so as someone that didn't then go through, like, a large course or a boot camp to make that transition, how did you make that transition? How did you kind of upskill yourself to get into there?
Yeah, no, it's a really funny question, and I feel like it's a question I got a lot at the Atlassian event as well, where people are like, how did you do this? And
Sure.
I always want to say, take every piece of advice I give with a grain of salt, because there are times that it has just truly been luck. There are times that someone should have smacked me and my attitude worked for me when it should have worked against me. And there's plenty of times it's worked against me as well. But I have always been obnoxiously inquisitive, and I have always been obsessed with finding the patterns, be it in human behavior, in the way the world works. I'm actually reading a book right now. It's one of our titles called The Pattern Seekers, and it's how autism has driven human invention, and how, there's gifted brains and autistic brains, and all of it is about this pattern recognition. And so from the support perspective, I think how I got pulled into product was I was asking questions because I was seeing patterns. Like, I was seeing customers coming in with the same complaints about our timed API call, for example. And then support was invited to product meetings when new features would be released, and they'd say, hey, we're building this thing, this is how it's going to work. And I'd be like, okay, well, what about this use case? What if someone uses it like this? What if this happens? How does this issue even having play into that?
Yep.
And I caught the attention of our director of product, because she's like, you're asking really good questions and you obviously have an intuition for it. And she's not the first person to tell me that. The other tech company I got hired for here in New York City, CEO said the same thing. He's like, you're a very intuitive product manager. Like, I am not the scrum master. I am not the person who's going to follow the textbook LinkedIn advice that you see, but I can go in and look at your product and be like, this is what's going to work. This is what's going to cause, and I can feel it, which, if you're a very, very data-driven company and you're obsessed with those numbers, I'm not going to be able to give you that.
Sure.
But what I can do is it's the customer empathy. I always had a lot of that. And when you talk about soft skills, it was that. It was, one, not being afraid to ask questions, but two, really being able to understand when customers were frustrated with our application or how they were using it and what issues they could potentially run into. And then just not being afraid to show people how smart I was, I guess, which I think is, especially as women, you're supposed to kind of be very demure and cutesy, which I'm simply incapable of, which has worked against me, but it's also in situations like that helped me a lot as well.
Sure. So, like, the willingness to continue to ask questions and to put yourself in situations that are uncomfortable, that were brand new, and also, like, trust your intuition to be asking those questions and to be digging in and looking for those answers.
Yes, and not needing to be right all the time, because sometimes I'll ask a question and someone will be like, no, that's not how that works at all. But I'd rather be like, okay, here's how I'm understanding. Is that correct? And have someone go, nope, that's not even close to correct. And go, okay, so tell me how it works then.
Right. I would rather you tell me what I'm missing than just nod and say, okay.
No, exactly. Like, don't, yeah, be like, yeah, sure. And then I find out later that I'm completely wrong. Like, I
you
hate
let me sound
that.
like an idiot for
Yeah,
weeks.
please. Like, no, just tell me I'm an idiot in the moment. Like, I would
Yeah,
love
I'm
to
with
know.
you. I'm with you. And so then how long were you there in that particular product role?
I was in that role for 8 months, and then unfortunately, I was impacted by a company-wide RIF. About 40 of us were laid off of a 120-person company, and that was kind of the moment. When you think about your life and moments where you were on a certain path and you jut off, I took my severance check and went on a 2-week solo trip to Europe, which was not financially the best and smartest decision I could have made, but for my soul and for my mind and for figuring out who I was on that trip, realized, okay, I'm pretty done with San Luis Obispo. I've been here for 9 years now. Professionally, romantically, all of the other areas of my life that kind of needed fulfilling, there was nothing left for me. So as I'm in Europe, I get a call from my former boss, and she says, hey, there's a guy in New York who's got a seed stage tech company. They're looking for product managers. Would you be willing to move? And I went, sure. Why not? What have I got to lose? Pick up, move to New York City. I'd been here once. I had loved it. I'd been here once for 2 days before I decided to move. Started conversations with him November 11th and was moved into my apartment by February 14th of last year. Unfortunately, that position it wasn't the right fit for me. Different leadership styles, and when it's a company that small, that stuff really rubs when it's not aligned.
Sure.
But that's how I found my way into publishing and in a role that I'm really enjoying thus far.
I'm really curious about that trip to Europe.
Yeah.
So I would say there are two huge nexus moments in my life. One, I'm a former addict. And so when I finally looked at myself in the mirror at 19 years old and was like, I have no idea who I am. I'm thinking about killing myself. I have no idea who I am, so I should probably figure that out before I try and end me.
Yeah.
And that was a huge nexus moment for me. And then that led me down my path of, self-development, getting really involved in psychology, philosophy, education, becoming a therapist, a behavior scientist, yada, yada. And then years into my career journey and during COVID, I had this massive heartbreak with someone who was love of my life at that point.
Yeah.
And I also was so dissatisfied with my work. And it was it's so weird. I had thought this was what I wanted, and I went on a solo cross-country road trip, not knowing what I was going to get out of it. It was more so I just need something.
Yeah.
And something is telling me to go do this, and it doesn't necessarily make sense, but I'm going to go do it. And something about that, I learned so many things in that journey, which then ultimately became seeds that turned into the fruits for starting the company that I run now, and how I then met my co-founder. So I'm curious about that trip to Europe. Did you get out of it what you were hoping?
Yeah, it's really funny. So I studied abroad in college, and I know there's a psychological phenomenon that once you're removed from the environment that created your trauma, that's often when the trauma comes back, and a lot of the unrepressing happens. Yeah. And so I got hit. It was 2016. I was a junior in college, and I was studying abroad in a town in Spain called Valladolid, which still has a place in my heart.
Where is that in Spain?
It's up above Madrid, a little bit, so Castilla. And all of a sudden, I'm having these weird flashbacks and these weird feelings, and coping with all of that on top of being away from my family for the longest. I'd been on trips for 2-3 weeks. Before this was 3 months.
And there's an ocean between you.
Yes, and my mom, brother, and I are incredibly close, probably codependently close. But I was navigating all that on top of a new relationship that had kind of started right before I left, and so it was just this very emotionally tumultuous time. And then my life was kind of just this giant, am I allowed to say clusterfuck?
Yeah, say it.
It was a giant clusterfuck of just unrepressed trauma and emotions and who the hell am I and what the hell happened to me. And my father was an addict who passed when I was 12 because of his addiction. And I think all of that just came up because I had been removed, and then it didn't stop. It was this fountain that lasted for years.
Right, can we turn the faucet off?
Yes, oh my gosh. And so I really didn't know what I was doing, but kind of similar to you, it was this gut feeling I had, because I remember I had gotten laid off and I was doing all the things you're supposed to do. I'm applying to jobs, I'm working out, I'm eating healthy, I'm being that girl, because that's what you're supposed to do when you get laid off and you want to rebuild.
Sure.
But I remember there was one night I was tossing and turning, and I just felt like I was missing something, I was late for something. And I super impulsively at 4 a.m. just went on my phone and booked a flight to Madrid. And the sense of calm I felt after that very impulsive, very expensive decision, I was like, oh, okay, so this is what I'm doing now. And then I planned the 2 weeks out, and I remember the very end of that trip, I went back to Valladolid. And I walked the same streets that I walked when I was studying abroad, and some of my favorite restaurants had closed, which was unfortunate, but it was this, like, it was like burying that part of me, like this carcass of that trauma and that loss and everything that had started in Valladolid. I went back and it felt like burying it, where it's like, okay, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to move on from that trauma. I'm ready to move on from that relationship that started the last time I was there. I'm ready to move on from the life I thought I was going to have in California, and I'm ready to build something new. So it was very much this burial, and yeah, so I think I got more out of it than I bargained for. Really.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, and there's such a deepening of my appreciation and faith in, you could call it magic or God, or just the awesomeness of the universe. In those moments where there's like a whisper within you that you have no idea where it's coming from, that's like, hey, you need to go to Spain.
Yeah.
You're like, what? If I tell people I'm doing this, they're gonna tell me stop.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when you actually follow it, and it leads you to things that you could have never seen coming. So I appreciate you sharing that. That gives me a little touch of that.
Yeah, of course. And it's funny that you should say whisper, because I kind of similarly to you, after coming back from study abroad, that's when I started Oxytocin Chronicles, which I don't keep up with as much anymore, but it was how I was processing everything I was going through. As I started writing these articles, and I ended up writing one that's called Anxiety Screams, Intuition Whispers, and it was all about learning how to trust my body again, and learning how to tell the difference between that manic energy of, oh my God, I have to do this, versus I have to do this.
Yeah, and because it's really such a hard thing when all that trauma starts getting unpacked. There are very intense feelings demanding that you do things.
Yes.
And then it's like, now I have to learn the skill to be able to hear those without necessarily immediately listening to them.
Yes.
Like to respond rather than react, to allow a little bit of space.
Yes.
And then it's really hard to then trust your body, which then sort of then exacerbates the anxiety, because then you can start living in your head.
Yes.
And then it's like there's no right answer to so many different things that come up, where it's like, oh, well, that could make sense there, that could make sense there.
Right.
And there's so many moments where you really have to be able to slow down and check in, okay, well, there's multiple right ways I could do this. Which way should I go? And when you don't have that relationship with your own intuition, like your own wisdom, it like you get lost, and then that anxiety just deepens and deepens. So like listening to those whisper moments are such magical experiences.
Yes. And they've worked out 100% of the time, which is the strangest thing. And that's why it's always so odd when people ask me for advice, because I don't know how to say, I just felt like I should wing it. Because if I give that advice to people, certain people are going to wing the wrong things. Yeah. Be like, Ray, you said this was going to work. Like, I had a friend when I started my LLC after I quit my last job. She's like, I'm going to start an LLC because you started one. I was like, well, maybe don't do that. Like, I don't know, that it's barely for me. It's definitely not going to be for you.
It's almost like not taking it the next step, which is like, it's a really strong like wisdom to listen to what other people are doing and to like seek out perspectives and be like, oh, that's really cool. You started an LLC and I'm inspired by what you're doing. Great. Like, listen to that pull and that you want that advice, but then you have to take it the next step of, okay, I've gotten all these different perspectives and seen all these other things that other people are doing that are really inspiring, and then actually doing what you did, which is, well, slowing down enough to listen for the whisper within yourself. Well, is your whisper telling you to start an LLC? Yeah. Because if not, maybe you need to slow down a little more.
Yes.
Or maybe you need to try something that is like at least a glimmer of a whisper for you.
Yes, exactly. Like, all whispers are not the same, and I think I was actually reading a post on LinkedIn today about how so much of this like self-help advice, or the advice we give people, is so inauthentic, because advice is so nuanced, right? Like, you and I could live the exact same life, and what works for me still might not work for you.
Totally.
And that's why it always rubs me the wrong way when people are like, this one trick, or like, this will change your life, or this diet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, no. Because like, if someone tried to live the exact same life I lived, it might turn out so much better or so much worse for them. And we need to stop acting like there's this one size fits all. Like, it always baffles me where a society's so obsessed with individualism but also a catch-all solution to everything, and we haven't figured out that those two things don't go together yet.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because it's like a weird paradox of what grows out of the myth of individualism, which is, in our society, we praise the, power of the individual to solve things, like Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb and George Washington founding America. And then you kind of slow down and you're like, well, that's actually not the story. Like, Thomas Edison had some money and he had a factory full of people running all kinds of experiments, which is not how I learned about the light bulb.
No.
The way I learned about the light bulb was like Thomas Edison found 1,000 ways not to do it, and on his 1,001st time, he made the light bulb.
Yeah.
And then I go up to Edison, New Jersey, and they're like, yeah, this is the factory where all of these workers who worked for Thomas Edison were running experiments. It's like, I'm sorry. What? Oh, so he had a team of people. Why didn't anyone tell me that? And it's like, oh, wait, like Elon Musk always had his brother and has like these teams of people. Jeff Bezos had his wife, like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger. Like, oh, the more you actually look at the stories of success, no one really does it alone.
No.
The story of the like savior individual that totally goes it alone isn't true. And then what ends up happening is we like put all this pressure on ourselves as kids to need to figure out what we're supposed to do and to prove ourselves, all the while not learning the skills for actually knowing what makes us come alive, how to regulate our emotions, how to connect with other people. And then it happens like where we end up in a society where I found myself years ago working with clients who were saying the same thing to me over and over again when I was working as a therapist, who would basically say, whether they were in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, like, I've built a life. And a lot of them, it was a big, bright, shiny life that was hollow on the inside. Yeah. Because you built it according to the rules that other people were handing you. Yeah. And no one else's map is going to lead you to that fulfillment.
Yeah. No, it's really funny. I was talking to someone who's incredibly dear to me recently, who I hadn't spoken to in a while. And we had gone through this very pivotal kind of thing together where we were always the kids who did the next right thing. So we had met in college, and we were both the older siblings, so you have the role model pressure as well. And we had landed ourselves, but we had landed ourselves in this situation because of always just taking the next right step, that we looked at one day and we didn't want it. And so we ended up going our separate ways, and we recently reconnected, and he asked me, he said, "Are you ever afraid of being happy?" And I said, every single day, but all I do then is rob myself of happiness. Like, it's not like I'm saving this happiness for someone else. It's not like if I deprive myself of happiness, it gets spread out to the people who deserve it. Right. Unfortunately, like, it's not like there's a finite amount of happiness in the world, and if I stay miserable, someone who deserves it more gets it, right?
If I just keep grinding and making more task lists for myself and just stay really busy, other people are going to be able to slow down and get a lot more joy and peace. Yeah, no, exactly, which I think is sometimes, especially when you've been through trauma or you have kind of a codependent mindset, you're like, I have to. One of the favorite things I've ever heard is that codependency is the shadow side of narcissism, because it's other people can't survive without me. It's not that I'm the center of the universe. It's just that everyone will suffer if I'm not picking up the slack, if I'm not carrying the team. And that's something that I've really, really had to learn and embody in my life. That was the role I played. That was the role I played in my family. That was the role that I assigned myself in relationships. And it wasn't until my current partner, who was like, I don't need you to project manage me. I am an adult man. And I remember I was so angry at him, and we were fighting for months, because he was like, I don't need you to do this. I just need you to trust me and do your thing, and I do my thing, and then we are a team. But how am I supposed to feel safe in this relationship with you if I can't prove to myself that I'm always useful?
Yeah, that was exactly it. And it's been this like crazy learning curve. So when this friend of mine asked me, "Are you ever afraid to be happy?" I just feel like the entire like last couple of years of my life flashed through my head, and I was just like, oh my God, yes, like every single day. And then I had to sit there and ask myself why before I responded to him. And it was through that question and through my response to him that something clicked in my brain where I was like, I need to get the hell over myself. Like, truly, I need to chill out, and I am not the end all be all, and that's fine. I am not the main character of the world. I am not the hero. I am not the martyr. I am just a girl, and that is enough for the people who love me, and that should be enough for me too. And that's it. I don't have to be that guy. Like, you know?
Yeah. I didn't know that I had that. And it was years after I had started going to grad school and was like becoming a therapist. And this really annoying thing happens when you start training to be a therapist, which is they like actually force you to learn a lot about your own emotions.
What?
And so like the research led me to learning about meditation. So then I started going to these like meditation things, and then they like made me meditate. And then I discover, oh my gosh, all this like anxiety within me that I thought was gone because now I was being productive and busy was still there, really lingering under the surface, and was actually the thing pushing me to constantly try and be so productive. And then I was at this silent meditation retreat, and on like the second day I thought I had just totally broken myself.
Oh my God.
I was like sweating through my shirt. I was filled with shame, and after like 2 hours of that, I opened my eyes. Everyone else seems peaceful. I'm like, great, I'm not doing it right. Everyone else is doing great. And then I like went on a long walk, and I sat down under a tree, and I was like, what is happening? And what I discovered was like the first day of the meditation retreat, what I discovered like that year beforehand was just how I was working on myself. I was really good at naming, like labeling and understanding what unpleasant emotions felt like. And I had no idea what like a pleasant emotion felt like and how they were sort of nuanced and different from each other. It was either like disappointed or ashamed or angry or stressed or guilty but then when it was like, well, where's joy? It's like, I kind of just have like not stressed. I don't know if I really access joy. Where would I feel? I don't feel that somewhere. And then what I discovered was like, there was this urge for busyness that if I was sort of just acknowledging the stress or the shame or the not enoughness that would come up and then allow that to go by, then there would be like a slightest moment of peace, and that was actually ridiculously vulnerable. It's like, oh my God, it's like wildly vulnerable. And then I would like try and then get busy with some other plan, because as long as I'm planning for something, then I wasn't in that vulnerability. And then when I dug in further, it was like, oh, it's because as a kid, I never really felt loved. Not because I didn't have people who were trying to love me, but like I had ADHD, I was really sensitive, had very little skills, and then like became an addict. So I was like all kinds of armored up. And so then it was like, oh, I want to be loved, and I'm carrying this story that the only way I could get there is if I totally fix the entire world and then prove myself ridiculously useful. And then I could actually allow myself to like open up. And what's funny is only actually once I started letting go of the constant busyness and problem solving and planning did I actually then start to experience a lot more joy and really fulfilling relationships.
No, it's been really interesting too, because I'm still very new in it, and that's why it also doesn't break my heart, but it humbles me in like a truly genuine way when people ask me for advice, because it makes me realize that I've portrayed myself as a person who knows what they're doing, and I don't. and it's one of those things where even my coworker said to me today, she's like, you're just so confident. And yes and no, right? Like, it's one of those things where I've gotten really good at trusting myself because I've pulled myself out of a lot of really shitty situations. And I've always been able to rebuild, and I've always been able to heal. But I also have been with me in those moments where I'm having a mental breakdown on the floor, or I've thrown the wine bottle at the wall, or I've thrown the chair at the boyfriend, like genuinely insane things that people wouldn't realize because they're like, oh, you're the mental health girl, you're the psychology girl, and I'm like,
why do you think I learned so much
it's like,
about
why
this
do you think I'm
stuff?
so into psychology? I am unwell. Like, but it's always so humbling to have people ask me, like, what do I do? And I always try to tell them what I can, but it comes back to the intuition thing where it's like, you just got to follow the whispers and not live your life for anyone else. Like, so many of the things that I've done like picking up and moving to New York City, calling off a wedding, people are like, how did you do it? And I'm like, because the alternative was the rest of my life being fine. And that's just, I'm okay with contentment. I am not okay with fine. I have survived my life for long enough. I don't need to thrive, but I would like to be content. And I think a lot of people are afraid of what it will look like. And there's probably some people who went to my high school or my college who are still like, didn't she call off a wedding? Yes, I did. And you know what? I'm still happier than you, babe. So I don't know what you want from me. So, yeah. It's
How fulfilled are you today?
more than I expected to be, I think. And I was talking to my partner about it last night at dinner because I sat down with this very matter-of-fact statement where I was like, I'm going to stop running away from you. And he went, great, we've been together 2 years. Thanks for showing up. We live together. And I was like, yeah, but I've decided now that I'm in this relationship. And I was outlining it where I was like, I have a job that, like, do I wake up every day like I can't wait to project manage engineering projects for a publishing house? No, but I like my job and I'm good at it and it pays the bills and that's enough. And I have a 1-bedroom apartment that I really, really like, and the radiator's a little bit too loud and sometimes there's a cockroach, but I like it and it's enough. And everything in my life is enough. And that's what contentment is there are things that could be better. Yes, always, but everything could be a whole hell of a lot worse too.
Amen.
And I think that's gratitude as well, is just looking at what you have and being like, okay, is it perfect? No, but is it enough? And am I loved and am I safe? Yeah, and I think that's fulfillment, at least for me.
Hell yeah. And it's funny, I see us now walking to the door that has the big sign on it that says trust. Because ultimately, like, choosing to stop running away and say, like, hey, actually, I've run the calculus, and I've realized, like, I actually really do trust you. After these 2 years and a whole shit ton of evidence, and like telling myself I did it, and then realizing I actually did. So like that choosing to trust your partner. I'm curious, what led you to want to present about trust at that Atlassian event, and why has trust been on your mind so much lately?
Yeah, I mean, partially because of what I've been going through in my personal life and the conversations I was having in my romantic relationship around just, I got told my love language was criticism, and that hurt. But I couldn't argue with him. I mean, I did anyways, and then I apologized. but I couldn't argue because I've always been a picker, and my mom knows this about me. Some people call it self-sabotage, whatever, but when things were calm and when things were good, we talked about that discomfort and that vulnerability and calm. I was like, well, now I've got to find a problem because there must be one. There must be something wrong. So I'm going to find it and I'm going to call it out. And then it became this thing of like, I'd come home and the bed was made and the laundry was done and the apartment was clean, but the dishes weren't done. And that's the one thing I asked you to do. And like, it's like, oh my gosh, Ray, can you not just be chill for like 3 seconds and just appreciate anything? So hearing that really, really hurt. And then also, the position I was coming from before I was at Hachette, I started at that company with a very, very high level of trust and then seemingly lost it overnight because I chose to advocate for my peers instead of leadership. And that really shook my confidence for a while because I was like, I moved across the country for this job. I was hired to do this job because of my empathy and because of my ability to lead people. That was called out in the hiring process. And then when I advocate for my people and I stand up for them because I'm telling you things you don't want to hear, that trust goes away. And that ownership and that level of responsibility I had slowly gets pulled from me. And I was getting like quiet fired. And I was like, I'm too smart for you to do this to me. I see what you're doing. Yeah, like, please. And then my little attitude problem kicks in where I'm just like, I know what you're doing. And I was raised that you treat the CEO and the janitor with the same amount of respect. I stand by that. But I'm also a person whose respect has to be earned. I don't care what your title is. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care if you're God. Until you've shown me a reason to respect you, I don't just give that out for free. And my disrespect is earned too. And once you've got that, it's a lot harder to shake. And so I think it was just between that event and my romantic relationship, and then also just the role that I got. Like I got a senior manager title, and I remember being like, who the hell am I? I've never been a senior anything, let alone in an industry I have no experience in. But then after having my trust or my confidence so shaken by that lack of trust at that other company, to have the amount of trust I've received at my current job has been so healing. And that's really what made me kind of want to talk about it.
Wow. So like being in a place where you could really see trust being eroded by the ways that people are leading and the things going on in your personal life and like the reflecting on trust that brings, and then being at this position with Hachette where then you can see, oh, this is like radically different and I can actually trust this place more, and like what is that all about?
Yeah.
Well, and the next thing I'm curious about is really what you learned when you started digging into it. Because for me, I sort of stumbled into learning a shit ton about trust because after I graduated grad school, I was put in this leadership position at this school and training a whole bunch of other therapists. And I was in my really early 20s, and I learned really quickly people who are middle-aged and who have been in a job for a really long time really don't love someone who's brand new coming in and telling them how to do their job.
No, they do not.
And so I was like, what is happening? I'm telling you all of the right things to do. I'm trying to help you, and you hate me.
Yes.
And you're not doing the things.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, because I actually have to be building like a system, like an organizational culture where people can actually own their actions and want to be improving. And that's when really I started diving into, you know, Brene Brown's work and everything about culture and understanding really the anatomy of trust. And it blew my mind and transformed every aspect of my life. So I'm curious, what are the really cool things that you learned as you started digging into really the mechanics of trust?
Yeah. I mean, I liked to see on a more kind of like database level, like the scientific evidence that people will become what we accuse them of. Like the example that I brought up during my presentation with
will you say that again?
People become what we accuse them of. And I brought up the example of the Boston firefighters in 1999 in my presentation about how they were accused of taking all this extra time off, and then the next year they doubled their time off. And then I thought about the moments in my life that I'd been accused of things, and being kind of the indignant person that I am, the amount of times I went, fine, I'll do it then. I'll be that person. If that's who you think I am, I'll be that person. So that was part of it. And the other part of it was I was reading this beautiful, beautiful book called Hope for Cynics by Dr. Jamil Zaki. And Zaki, I don't know, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's a Stanford psychologist, and his best friend, who was this just societal optimist, ended up passing away from brain cancer. And he was wrestling with that because he was like, you know, he was the best guy I knew. And he goes through this, and he maintained that optimism and that love for society and mankind throughout not only his illness, but throughout growing up with a absent schizophrenic mother and in poverty and all of these other things. And so he started studying, while he was alive, the science of cynicism. And Dr. Jamil Zaki kind of like took on his work afterwards and ended up writing this book. And so much of it, I was reading it right around the election too, which just made it hit so much closer to home. And so much of it was, we have alienated ourselves and made ourselves so incredibly lonely, assuming that we understand other people's intentions and psychology and all of these things. Like, the bane of my existence has been TikTok making narcissism and gaslighting like words of the year. I'm like, that's not what that is. Like, someone disagreeing with you or setting a boundary with you is not narcissism.
Yeah, hard reality. Everyone that hurts us in any kind of relationship does not automatically become a narcissist. No. And those cluster B personality disorders that you're throwing around are not as common as you think. And so I was reading all of this science about just this evidence of like, hey, when we really trust people, we usually get a lot of that back. And obviously, yeah, there's assholes everywhere. And yeah, sometimes you're going to trust someone who screws you over. That's just life. But we've assumed that everyone's going to screw us. And a lot of that is systemic, especially for certain marginalized groups. And I completely understand that. But your peers, right? Like the other one that I talked about was
they went on a college campus and they asked college students, how many people do you think would be willing to sit down and have a conversation with you?
Yeah.
And would you be willing to sit down and have a conversation with a stranger? And the differences in that were staggering. Almost everyone was willing to sit down and have a conversation with a stranger, but thought that no one would want to talk to them.
Right. I remember that was coming from a woman in the audience.
Yes.
Who said, I would like to connect with more people at work, but like I don't want to offend them by like trying to make an introduction or saying hello.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, maybe they're not going to be as bothered by it as you think they might.
Yeah, no, exactly. So there's a lot of really hopeful science and data and stories out there. And unfortunately, it's not as sexy as the negativity and violence and horror and division that we get sold. But it is there.
Well, and I think all of that is connected. And let's see if I can actually connect these threads that I'm seeing in my head right now.
Okay.
Which is, what has happened to us is our technology has evolved so rapidly that socioculturally we've not been able to keep up. And so our boundaries around when we work have eroded. Our structure for how we engage with information and decide what is true has eroded. These algorithms are driving that, which have no real accountability structures or visibility. And so we're all sort of overwhelmed. There's so much content everywhere. And so that's sort of overwhelming us. Everyone's competing for our attention, which is ramping up our stress. We have less experiences of connecting with one another, especially for kids, giving them experiences of co-regulation, which then allows you to build trust in your own body and trust with each other. Meanwhile, we also gained a ton of visibility about what people in power were doing.
Yeah.
And we saw things like the banking disaster that was like, oh, I guess maybe we can't trust the banks.
Yeah.
I guess we can't trust the government to then hold the banks accountable when they do things wrong. Or I guess we can't trust politicians when they say there are weapons of mass destruction. Oh, and no one's going to apologize for that. And so there's like all of these instances that broke this trust with institutions that's been going on, while also we're getting so overwhelmed. And then ultimately what ends up happening is we get folded into becoming cynics because we don't have access to the trust that allows us to open up into being optimists.
Yeah.
And then as we further close up and sort of become those cynics, we start to treat people in ways that erodes even further that trust. And it's funny because I've seen it both working as a specialist going into schools, helping educators understand challenging kids, and going into corporations, helping managers understand quiet quitting. And I understand them as the same behavior, that ultimately we have core needs as human beings. One of them is connection. Another one is coherence, though. And what happens to a kid in a classroom is when they don't believe that belonging is accessible to them, then they will settle for at least getting coherence. And what that means is they become what you accuse them of. Because when you react to their behaviors by further shaming them, you're communicating to them that they can't belong here. It's rather than saying, you belong here, you're a part of this community, that's why you have to follow these rules because I care about you, which is then trying to initiate guilt, when instead you communicate, there's something wrong with you, you're a problem. Eventually, they're going to buy into that because they have to, because they have to make sense of what you're telling them, and they want to have a coherent story of who they are. And since they don't belong there, to create more safety, they're going to deepen that coherence. So what are they going to do? They're going to give you more evidence that they don't belong. They're going to become more of a problem. And that's also what happens at companies. When managers erode trust with their employees, ultimately those employees feel like they can't trust you, and they feel like you don't trust them. And so it becomes easier and easier to disengage. And so it's this like shitty spiral that happens when we all sort of erode trust and don't actively try to build it. We activate more cynics, we activate more polarization, and then we further erode everyone's well-being.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And you tied it together beautifully.
Did that make any sense?
No, that made perfect sense. No, and it was just I was nodding along because it was it's just my mom always used to joke with me that my catchphrase was I do what I want. And it was because I got told that I always did what I want and that there was no taming me, there was no controlling me, and all I wanted was structure, and I was told I was too independent and too self-sufficient for structure, or I didn't need it because I was always just such an easy kid. I could always figure it out on my own. And so then I went through life figuring it out on my own, and it took me 28 years to realize, like, no, I can be part of a group project. I just had a group project and I let someone else do most of the work, and
Nice.
that's on growth. Like,
That's growth, baby.
that's growth, baby.
So if people are listening, they're like, oh shit, okay, trust good, distrust bad.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell do we build trust?
Just be honest, man. Like and it sounds like so like, oh, what do you mean be honest? Like, just truly just be honest. Like, show up and say, God, I had a crazy night, or I don't know what you're talking about, or I've never worked with that system before, or hey, it really kind of bothered me when you did this. Can we talk about that? And I think there's that. I brought up those 4 ways to respectfully disagree, because I think a lot of times trust comes from being able to disagree with someone and feel loved or accepted anyways. And it's a really difficult thing to do, because I think there's a lot of anger and defensiveness and combativeness in this world right now, and we've lost curiosity for one another. So being obnoxiously curious about your fellow man, and then showing them it's safe to be honest with you by being honest yourself, right? Like, I will walk into a room and be a complete and total spaz, and I can say that because I have ADHD. Don't come for me. But I can walk into a room and just be like, oh my God, I didn't sleep last night. I forgot to brush my teeth. Does anyone have deodorant? I'm an absolute mess right now. And there's going to be a faction of people that are like, can she not keep her stuff together? God, she's so loud. Won't she just shut up? And that's fine. That's been my whole life. But there's also going to be a faction of people who are going to go, oh my God, I didn't sleep either. But yeah, here's some deodorant. Like, I went to this crazy thing. Like, like, it's just, you build community when you're honest, because you build fake communities when you're dishonest. And then you're like, why am I so lonely? Well, you lied the whole time.
Right. Why don't I like hanging out with these people? Because you were pretending to be somebody.
Yeah.
And now they know that person.
Yeah.
They were drawn to that person you were pretending to be.
Yeah. Surprise.
So having the courage to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
having the courage to have open conversations with people about what you're experiencing, things you need to tell them,
Mm-hmm.
finding ways to do that respectfully, and disagreeing respectfully.
Yep.
What do you see when you think about your future of work? And how does trust play a part in it?
If I have immense success, it'll be completely accidental. I'm serious. Like, I have no intentions of chasing it. I have been very lucky in the opportunities and situations I found myself in that have allowed me to have the career I have had or make the connections I've had. But also, a lot of that has come from my transparency and my authenticity, and people being like, oh, okay, I can trust her because she's just her. Like, what you see is what you get from day one. And so the future of my work is honestly, I'm going to keep doing what I like. And if that leads to immense wealth and greatness, cool. But if it just pays the bills until I retire, that's fine too.
Amen. Well, this has been so fun.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that we did this.
Me too.
If people are listening and they're like, I want more of Ray in my life, where can they find you?
Just on LinkedIn. I'm not very active on any of my other socials. My Instagram literally exists just so my aunts and cousins know that I'm alive and well. But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can always email me. It's Rachel, RACHEL.MARI.FOOTE@gmail.com. Slide in the LinkedIn DMs, slide in the email. Please don't find me on the street. That will creep me out. But yeah, if you need me, I'm around. And you can always bother Matt because he knows where to find me too.
That's right. And we'll put the link to her LinkedIn on the show notes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.